I'd like to help you to understand the pros and cons of using AI to prepare job interviews. The first thing I'd like to talk about here would be one where you ask the AI for feedback on your interview answers. And this is a very common approach that many candidates use. I've also trialed it with my clients. And the main thing, the one question that is fundamental if you're using this approach would be to ask yourself, do you know what a great answer to a behavioral interview question looks like? If you do, then you're basically adding on your strength. You're using AI to improve that answer that it makes sense, but still AI might give you some useful information. In my experience, what actually happens when candidates query AI to improve their interview answers is they don't have an actual baseline scenario. They're using AI to create a baseline, a bar that AI considers is great for these job interviews. Now, if you think about how AI works, it's basically, a search on steroids. They crawl the internet for what they call great examples of answers to behavioral questions, and they use some algorithmic thinking of what makes a great answer to a behavioral interview question. Now, in my experience, whenever I enter such a loop, I end up with something that is not really that qualitative in my experience. And what do I compare this to when I say it's not qualitative? Well, I compare it with an answer of a real candidate that I know that candidate passed their job interview. And usually when I feed that answer to the AI to compare that answer with what AI said would be an amazing answer, the AI said, oh my God, that's an exceptional answer. You should definitely use that in your job interview. And basically AI changes their baseline scenario of what a great answer looks like to the answer I just fed into it. Even though I already spent numerous queries to try to improve my first answer using AI, the baseline scenario is of essence here. So basically my advice to you would be, you must, if you know what a great answer to behavioral interview question looks like, then it's fine. If you do not, then basically you're gambling more or less using AI to improve your interview answers, because you have no chance of reaching a qualitative approach here because you don't know where you're going, right? The second thing I'd like to talk about here is that many answers look amazing on paper, but the situation changes dramatically when you have to deliver them. And using AI to prepare your job interview is no exception. So the example is quite simple. Let's say you know what a great answer looks like to a behavioral interview question, and you further improve it using AI. AI might give you some great signals as to how can you reward that answer so it sounds a lot better on paper. Right? What happens is that if you role play it, if you speak it out loud, and by the way, most candidates do this for the first time in their job interview, it will sound entirely different than you expect it to. Okay? The most common side effect of this is that it will sound as if it's not from you as a candidate. If it's not your language, it's someone else's language. And basically that would trigger a suspicion on the interviewer's side. It's not as if that sole example will be the whole branding of you during a job interview, but the problem is you deliver that answer which sounds suspiciously interesting when compared to another interview answer that's your actual language, which will sound different, right? So your interviewer will become suspicious, and that's never to your advantage as an interview candidate. Also a very common approach while delivering an answer that you improved using AI and assuming it's a qualitative substance, you might sound like an AI candidate. The AI, so basically me as an interview coach, I could tell very quickly if someone used AI to change the way they talk. Okay? And it's usually not for the better, by the way. And the same thing happens in a job interview. Now, you might argue, so what if I use AI to reward my answers? They still sound reasonably well. Well, in fact, there's a bit of a backlash going on in job interviews these days. There's the anti-AI trend, so to speak. And I made numerous videos of how well-known NVIDIA, Google, Microsoft, and all these companies explicitly warned candidates against using AI in job interviews for, for obvious reasons. So even though you might be well-intentioned in using AI to improve your great answer, if you sound like an AI candidate, that will rarely be to your advantage, right? Maybe one more, just quickly. An extreme downside of using AI to improve your interview answers would be that if you ask AI to improve your answer 3 times, 2 out of those 3 times will be with some fake information, fake metrics, decisions you didn't own, dramatizations that make little sense for that context. But I talked about this extensively, so I won't insist on this. Finally, AI has some well-established biases when improving interview answers. And to understand why it has these biases, you must understand how it works. And I said earlier in the video, AI basically works by indexing whatever is online. And if you look online, there's plenty of places that advise answering behavioral interview questions in a certain way. That certain way might be perfectly fine for some answers, for some candidates, but not to all answers for all candidates. And it's rare that I see high quality answers when it comes to interviewing with high performing companies. Usually the algorithm is that you use these answers with some, where you have to pass a behavioral interview. You don't have to excel with these things too much. So basically of this baseline scenario, AI has some well-known biases that you want to pay particular attention to. For example, if you're a PM and you want to talk about a cross-functional collaboration, more often than not, AI will suggest that you use frameworks. You talk about frameworks that you use to build more credibility in your interview answers. Same thing if you're working in sales. You want to explain your sales funnel through a framework. A framework that is an established framework of someone else or some university, stuff like that, to build on credibility. Now, what ends up in real life scenarios is that those frameworks might not be to your advantage. They're not truthful in the first place. So if you associate yourself with a framework that you didn't really use at the time, then it's faking that information. But more often than not, it will also increase the length of your answer unnecessarily. And you would say, hey, but it adds credibility, but in reality, it doesn't really add much value. It won't work. Another well-known bias that AI has while improving your interview answers is to go hands-off. To provide, so for example, if your role is extremely hands-on, a mid-level manager or a line manager, by improving your answers using AI, there is a tendency it will go towards the hands-off approach, to a more senior type of role. And, this is quite problematic because if you're selling yourself as a hands-off candidate, overqualified, so to speak, candidate, when going for a hands-on role, I've heard numerous occasions of candidates getting rejected for being too hands-on when someone looking for hands-off, and vice versa, hands-off when they were looking for hands-on. Another well-known bias of AI-assisted answers will be metrics. So using a metric is a good idea in your interview answers. The most relevant metric to give a sense of the importance of your achievements. Oftentimes also using more than one metric could make sense on the condition that you would help your interviewer to either understand the context of your answer, either to sell yourself with some amazing achievements. Now, what I observed is that if you ask the AI to improve your answers using metrics, it will add too many metrics and not the best metrics, or at least not the most relevant metrics with respect to your actual example. So in other words, it would add some metrics, some metrics that might make sense but are not truthful. Again, so it would use those metrics. Another side effect, another bias of AI rewarded answers would be templating in the star format. It's a good thing, don't get me wrong, but the problem is that AI has a new trend of adding learnings or reflections to each and every one of your answers. Now, you may say, okay, but what's wrong with that? Well, if you do it once or twice, it might even make sense. It might add value. to the answers you give in job interviews. But I've seen story banks of 20 stories. Each of those stories had reflections. So, if you overdo these things, it will not play to your advantage. But many candidates would think that, hey, you know what, if AI says this, that's the baseline scenario. That's how I excel in job interviews, where AI thinks the bar is. So again, this is a bias you might pay particular attention to. Overstructuring, doing your answers in star format is good for most roles, but if you're applying for a director level role, the star format is small fish in these job interviews. And maybe let me close by saying this, which is maybe not the most comfortable thing you'll hear today, but AI will never say that your answers suck. Okay, this is when compared to a human being. When you ask an interview coach, when you ask someone who knows what they're doing with these job interviews, they might give you a direct answer with these things. So basically what I'm pitching to you here is that you must carefully watch for your critical thinking skills to be the primary driver of adding value to your interviewing skills, whether if it's AI or whatever other technology or humans that you use for your upcoming job interviews. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.